Welcome to section 9.1. This is the 70th session of the CISSP exam prep series. In this session, we'll unpack the principle of shared responsibility. We'll answer several questions. What does shared responsibility actually mean? Who inside your own organization owns a piece of it? How does the responsibility split when you move to the cloud? What do you owe the wider community when you find a new threat? And how does the industry share threat data at machine speed? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because you never secure a system alone. Picture a regional credit union that runs its core banking on a hosted platform, leans on an open source database, and trusts a payment vendor for card processing. If any one of those hands drops the ball, the credit union bleeds. On the job, your task is to know exactly where your duty starts and where someone else's begins. Blurry lines are where breaches hide. So what does shared responsibility actually mean? It means no organization stands alone. You run the same operating systems as everyone else, speak the same protocols, and lean on the same off-the-shelf and open-source building blocks. That shared foundation means you inherit shared exposure. Think of a city water supply. Every household draws from the same pipes, so keeping the water clean is a duty spread across all of them, not one. Who inside your own organization owns a piece of it? Everyone does, at their own level. Your security leadership sets the direction and stands up the controls. Regular staff carry it by doing their jobs inside the guardrails those controls create. Auditors carry it by watching for violations and confirming the rules actually hold. And leadership owes stakeholders sound decisions that keep the business standing. Picture a relay team. If any single runner drops the baton, the whole team loses, no matter how fast the others ran. How does the responsibility split when you move to the cloud? The provider secures part of the stack and you secure the rest. So both sides must agree on the seam. This is the cloud shared responsibility model, and misreading it is a classic mistake. A provider might lock down the physical data center and the hypervisor while you stay on the hook for your data, your access rules, and your configurations. Think of renting a warehouse. The landlord guards the building and the locks, but what you store inside and who you hang keys to is entirely on you. What do you owe the wider community when you find a new threat? You owe responsible disclosure. When you uncover a fresh vulnerability or a live threat, the ethical move is to report it to the affected vendor or to a threat intelligence source. Sitting on it quietly leaves everyone else exposed to the same flaw. Think of spotting a cracked support beam in a shared parking garage. You do not just protect your own car and walk away. You warn the operator so every driver stays safe. How does the industry share threat data at machine speed? Through automated indicator sharing. This is a government-backed effort to swap indicators of compromise and threat intelligence between the public and private sectors quickly and automatically. An indicator pairs an observed fact with a hypothesis about a threat, and an observable might be a malicious file identified by its hash. The plumbing that carries this uses two paired standards. One is a common structured language for describing cyber threats, and the other defines how systems exchange that structured information. Think of an emergency broadcast network for hospitals. The instant one facility detects an outbreak, a shared format and a shared channel push the warning to every other facility automatically. So let's bring it together. Shared responsibility says security is a duty you split with the world because you all stand on the same technology. Inside your walls, leadership, staff, and auditors each own a slice. In the cloud, you and the provider must agree on the exact seam between your duties. When you find a new threat, you disclose it responsibly, and the wider industry trades indicators automatically at machine speed. Know where your line sits, and you close the gaps that live between the hands. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.2. This is the 71st session of the CISSP exam prep series. In this session, we'll sort out where data lives and whose rules govern it. We'll answer several questions. What is data localization? What is data sovereignty? How do these two ideas actually differ? Why does one sit inside the other? And what is data portability, and how does it fit? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because the moment your data crosses a border, a second country's laws may reach it. Picture a streaming startup that signs its first wave of subscribers across 3 continents. Suddenly, it faces rules about where those records must physically sit and which government can demand a look. On the job, you are the one who translates those legal constraints into storage architecture. Get it wrong, and the fines and the shutdown orders land on your desk. So what is data localization? It is the requirement to keep data physically inside a specific country or region. Regulations often demand that sensitive or personal records stay within the borders where they were created or where the person they describe lives. This can block cross-border transfers outright and force you to redesign where your storage and processing physically sit. Think of a rule that says a country's tax files must never leave its soil. The paperwork stays in the building, no matter how convenient it would be to ship elsewhere. What is data sovereignty? It is the principle that data falls under the laws of the place where it lives or was created. A government claims authority over information collected inside its borders, and you must comply with its local privacy and protection laws. It reaches past mere storage to cover legal jurisdiction and control over how the data is handled. Think of a diplomatic pouch that lands in a foreign airport. The instant it touches that ground, the local legal system has a claim on what happens next. How do these two ideas actually differ? They overlap, but they aim at different targets. Localization is narrow. Its focus is the physical location of storage and processing, driven by specific laws that say the servers must sit inside a given border. Sovereignty is broad. It covers legal jurisdiction, regulatory compliance, and the overarching authority a government holds, shaped by legal, political, and cultural forces. So localization mostly forces you to build data centers in the right place, while sovereignty reshapes your whole approach to governance, compliance, and how you deal with outside vendors. Think of parking rules versus the full traffic code. Where you may park is one narrow rule inside the much larger body of law that governs the road. Why does one sit inside the other? Because localization is really a subset of sovereignty. Localization answers just one question: where the data physically rests. Sovereignty wraps around that and adds jurisdiction, governance, and legal compliance across the whole geopolitical boundary. Both push in the same direction. They force your data practices to line up with local law. Think of a single gear inside a larger machine. The small gear does one job, but it only makes sense as part of the bigger mechanism turning around it. What is data portability, and how does it fit? It is the right of people to move their personal data easily and securely from one service to another. It lets a user carry their records between platforms, which hands them control and keeps providers competing for their business. It usually rides alongside privacy and data protection rules that lift up individual rights. Think of keeping your phone number when you switch carriers. The number is yours to take, so no single provider can hold you hostage. So let's bring it together. Data localization pins your data to a physical place inside a border. Data sovereignty says whichever country holds the data also holds legal authority over it. They differ in focus and scope, and localization is really a narrow subset of the broader sovereignty picture. Both demand that your storage and handling match local law. And data portability rounds it out by giving people the right to carry their own records between services. Map these to your architecture early, and the legal geography stops being a surprise. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 9.3, Part 1. This is the 72nd session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part opens the ground floor of computer architecture, where every higher control eventually rests. In this session, we'll dig into the hardware and execution foundations of secure systems. We'll answer several questions. Why does complexity weaken security? What is the processor, and what does it really do? How do systems do many things at once? How do protection rings insulate the operating system? And what states does a process pass through as it runs? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because your strongest firewall means nothing if the machine beneath it is rotten. Picture a trading platform where every millisecond counts. If a flaw lets code jump from a user program straight into the operating system core, no perimeter control will save it. On the job, you have to reason about how the hardware and the operating system enforce boundaries. That is where real, unbypassable security either lives or dies. So why does complexity weaken security? Because more moving parts means more places for flaws to hide. Every added component is another surface to secure and another spot where a vulnerability can slip in. As the count of weaknesses and threats climbs, the assurance the system offers drops. The simpler the design, the more confidence you can place in it. Think of a house with one door versus one with 50. Every extra door is one more lock to check and one more way in. What is the processor, and what does it really do? It is the nerve center that governs every major operation in the machine. It either performs or coordinates the calculations that let the system do its work. Here is the surprise. It only understands a small, fixed set of simple operations. The operating system, compilers, and interpreters translate rich, high-level code down into those bare instructions. That narrow instruction set is deliberate because it lets the chip run at blazing speed. Think of a master conductor who knows only a handful of hand signals, yet directs a whole orchestra through them. How do systems do many things at once? Several distinct techniques share that goal, and the exam wants you to keep them apart. Let me lay out the full set, then take each in turn. There is multitasking, multi-core, multiprocessing, multi-programming, and multi-threading. They all attack the problem of doing more than one thing, but they solve it in very different ways. Think of 5 different kitchen strategies for serving many diners at once. Same goal, very different mechanics. What is multitasking, and how does multi-core differ? Multitasking means one system handling several tasks at once. On a single core, the operating system rapidly juggles tasks, so only one truly executes at any instant, like a juggler whose hand touches just one ball at a time. Multi-core changes the game physically. A modern chip packs 2, 4, dozens, or even thousands of independent cores that genuinely run at the same moment. So multitasking is a clever illusion of parallelism, while multi-core delivers the real thing. What's separate multiprocessing, multiprogramming, and multi-threading? Multiprocessing harnesses more than one processor to run a single multi-threaded application, and it may pin a given task to a specific core, which is called affinity. Multiprogramming batches several tasks on one processor, so when one pauses for a peripheral, the next steps in, cutting total time across the batch, even if any single job waits longer. Multi-threading runs several tasks inside one process, where a thread is a self-contained stream of instructions. Because switching between threads costs far less than switching between whole processes, it is the more efficient choice. Think of one worker splitting attention across notes on a single project versus a full second worker joining in. How do protection rings insulate the operating system? They sort code into concentric rings by privilege, with the innermost ring holding the most power. Most modern systems use 4 rings, numbered 0 through 3. Ring 0 is the kernel, the part that stays resident in memory and can reach any resource. The next rings hold other operating system components, then drivers and utilities. User programs sit in the outermost ring with the least access. A process in an outer ring cannot just grab what it wants. It must ask a handler in a lower ring through a system call which checks its credentials first. In practice, many systems collapse this into 2 divisions, a privileged kernel mode and a restricted user mode. Think of a secure building with nested clearance zones. To reach the vault at the center, you pass a guard who verifies you at every checkpoint. What states does a process pass through as it runs? A process moves through a defined life cycle, and the operating system schedules it by priority within a queue. Let me walk the states. In the ready state, it waits, prepared to run the moment a processor frees up. In the running state, also called the problem state, it executes on the processor until it finishes, its time slice expires, or it blocks. In the waiting state, it pauses for input or output to be serviced before continuing. The supervisory state kicks in when it needs elevated privileges for tasks like changing system configuration. And in the stop state, it has finished or been terminated, so the operating system reclaims its memory. Think of a customer moving through a bank, from the waiting bench to the teller window, sometimes pausing while paperwork is fetched, and finally leaving once served. So let's bring it together. Complexity is the enemy of assurance, so simpler designs earn more trust. The processor is the nerve center that runs a small, fast instruction set. Systems fake or achieve parallelism through multitasking, multi-core, multi-processing, multi-programming, and multi-threading, each with its own trade-offs. Protection rings sort code by privilege and force outer code to ask permission of the inner core. And a process cycles through ready, running, waiting, supervisory, and stopped as it lives out its turn on the processor. These foundations are where hardware-level security truly begins. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 9.3, Part 2. This is the 73rd session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part continues our tour of hardware, turning now to memory and storage. In this session, we'll map the memory hierarchy and the risks that come with it. We'll answer several questions. What is read-only memory and its programmable cousins? What is random access memory? And how do dynamic and static differ? What are registers and the addressing schemes that reach memory? How does secondary and virtual memory extend the system? How do we classify storage devices? And what memory security issues must you guard against? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because sensitive data leaves fingerprints in memory and on drives long after you think it is gone. Picture a law firm retiring a batch of laptops. If the drives are handed off without proper wiping, privileged client files can walk out the door. On the job, you decide how data is held, refreshed, and destroyed. Understanding the physical media is what lets you protect the secrets living inside it. So what is read-only memory and its programmable cousins? Read-only memory holds contents the system can read, but not change, burned in at the factory. It often carries the startup instructions a machine runs before loading its operating system, and its unchangeable nature makes it ideal for those innermost workings. But there is a family that can be written to. A basic programmable chip lets the end user burn in the contents once, after which it is locked. An ultraviolet erasable version can be wiped clean with a special light and reused. An electrically erasable version uses voltage on its pins to erase. And flash memory grows from that last idea, erasing and rewriting in blocks rather than single bytes, which is why it powers memory cards, thumb drives, and solid-state drives. Think of stone tablets that graduate to chalkboards. Some you carve once, some you wipe with light, and some you erase a whole section at a time. What is random access memory? And how do dynamic and static differ? Random access memory is readable and writable working memory that holds what the computer needs while processing. It is volatile, so when power drops, everything in it vanishes, which is why critical data must always have a backup elsewhere. Main memory is the large pool of it, and small ultra-fast caches sit closer to the processor to speed repeated access. Underneath, two types compete. Dynamic memory stores bits in tiny capacitors that leak charge, so the processor must constantly refresh them. Static memory uses switch-like circuits that hold their state without refresh, running faster but costing more. Designers blend the two to balance speed against price. Think of a cheap whiteboard whose ink fades unless you keep retracing it, versus a costly one that stays crisp on its own. What are registers and the addressing schemes that reach memory? Registers are a tiny bank of memory built right into the processor, feeding its arithmetic and logic unit at full processor speed. To reach data elsewhere, the processor uses addressing schemes. Register addressing points at one of those onboard registers. Immediate addressing supplies the value right inside the instruction. Direct addressing names the exact memory location to use. Indirect addressing gives an address that holds another address, so the processor follows the pointer to the real data. And base plus offset addressing starts from an address in a register and adds an offset to compute the final spot. One caution here. A pointer that ends up null or corrupted, sometimes through a race condition where two operations collide, can crash the whole system. Think of directions to a house. You might be handed the address itself, or a note saying the address is written on a card at another location. How does secondary and virtual memory extend the system? Secondary memory is your longer-term storage, the magnetic, optical, and flash media that the processor cannot touch directly. To use that data, the operating system first reads it into working memory. Virtual memory is a clever trick that stretches the addressable space using a swap file on disk. When the system needs data that has been paged out, it pulls it back from disk into real memory, a process called paging. The catch is speed, because that disk exchange is slow. More physical memory reduces the need for it, and fast flash media softens the penalty when it happens. Think of a small desk with an overflow filing cabinet behind you. You keep swapping folders between the two, and the reach behind you always costs a moment. How do we classify storage devices? 3 simple contrasts capture it. Primary storage is the working memory kept close to the processor, while secondary storage is the long-term media like drives, tapes, and disks. Volatile devices lose their contents when power is cut, while non-volatile ones retain data through a power loss. And random access media let you jump straight to any location by address, while sequential media, like a magnetic tape, force you to pass everything before the spot you want. Think of the difference between flipping straight to any page in a book versus fast-forwarding through a cassette to reach one song. What memory security issues must you guard against? Memory and storage hold your secrets, so they need deliberate handling at end of life. Any device that might retain sensitive data should be purged before it ever leaves your control. And this is especially true for storage, media, and the read-only memory family designed to keep data through power loss. The danger is not limited to disks. Even volatile working memory can briefly hold its charge after shutdown, and a skilled attacker can try to recover it. That is the idea behind a cold boot attack, which freezes memory chips to slow the fade of resident data and lift secrets like encryption keys. Think of a whiteboard that seems erased but still shows a ghost of the writing if you catch it in the right light. So let's bring it together. Read-only memory is fixed, while its programmable family, up through flash, trades some permanence for the ability to rewrite. Random access memory is fast but volatile, split into leaky, dynamic, and steady static forms. Registers feed the processor directly, and addressing schemes route it to the data it needs. Secondary and virtual memory extend capacity at the cost of speed, and storage divides along primary versus secondary, volatile versus non-volatile, and random versus sequential. Above all, purge sensitive media before release, because data lingers where you least expect it. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 9.3, Part 3. This is the 74th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part closes our hardware tour with storage safety, stray signals, peripherals, and firmware. In this session, we'll cover the physical layer risks that slip past software controls. We'll answer several questions. How do you truly secure secondary storage media? How can stray electronic signals leak your data? Which everyday input and output devices carry hidden risk? And why is firmware such a tempting target? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because attackers do not always come through the network. Picture a research lab where a rival photographs a screen from across the courtyard, lifts a discarded drive from the recycling, and slips a tap into a keyboard cable. On the job, you have to think like that adversary and shut down the physical channels. These are the leaks that no firewall rule will ever catch. So how do you truly secure secondary storage media? You confront the fact that deleting is not erasing. Data can linger on a drive even after a delete or a reformat, a problem called data remnants, and recovery tools can pull it right back. To really remove it, you sanitize by overwriting every trace, or you physically destroy the media. Solid-state drives complicate this because they spread writes across cells through wear leveling and swap in reserve blocks, so a simple wipe may miss data hiding in retired cells. Since drives are also easy to steal, and the real loss is the confidential data rather than the hardware, full disk encryption is your safety net, and removable media deserve the same encryption care. Think of a whiteboard that keeps faint ghosts of old notes. Only scrubbing every inch or replacing the board entirely truly clears it. How can stray electronic signals leak your data? Because many devices radiate electromagnetic energy that an eavesdropper can capture and decode. Monitors, cables, drives, and wireless gear all emit signals that may carry confidential content, and with the right equipment, an adversary can read them from a distance. The countermeasures grow from a body of standards for controlling these emanations, a discipline now known as emission security. Your main defenses come in three forms. A Faraday cage wraps an area in a conductive skin that blocks signals from leaving or entering. White noise floods the space with false or masking signals, so real emanations drown in the clutter. And a control zone applies both of those to just one room or floor, leaving the rest of the building untouched. Shielding cables or swapping copper for fiber helps too. Think of a soundproof booth. The walls stop your conversation from leaking, and a background hum ensures anyone pressing an ear to the glass hears only static. Which everyday input and output devices carry hidden risk? All of them, in ways teams routinely overlook. Monitors leak through the video signal, but the bigger danger is often plain shoulder surfing or a hidden camera catching the display. Printers are easy to walk sensitive pages out of. They often store copies on an internal drive, and networked multifunction units can even be reached through old fax and modem pathways. Keyboards and mice can be tapped by a tiny bug on the cable or by intercepting their wireless signal, capturing every keystroke cheaply. And legacy telephone modems open an uncontrolled backdoor, letting an outsider bypass your perimeter or an insider funnel data out, so they belong under a strict policy or an outright ban. Think of an office where the real leaks are not the locked front door but the open window, the shared printer tray, and the forgotten back gate. Why is firmware such a tempting target? Because it is the low-level code that boots your device, and whoever controls it controls the machine before defenses even load. Firmware lives in read-only or flash chips and drives basic device operation. And the startup firmware on a motherboard, the modern successor to the old basic system, brings up the hardware and hands off to the operating system. Updating it is called flashing, and that is exactly what attackers abuse. In a flashing attack, a poisoned firmware image installs hidden remote control or malicious features. The defenses are built into modern startup firmware. Secure boot, also called boot attestation, refuses to load any driver or operating system that lacks a trusted digital signature, blocking low-level rootkits. Measured boot goes further by hashing every element of the boot sequence and storing those hashes in a trusted platform module, so you can later compare against known good values. It does not stop an attack in the moment. It records the evidence, like a security camera watching the front door. So let's bring it together. Deleting is not erasing, so sanitize or destroy media. Mine the quirks of solid-state drives, and encrypt everything portable. Stray emanations leak data, and you counter them with Faraday cages, white noise, control zones, and shielding. Everyday peripherals hide real risk, from shoulder surfing at a monitor to bugged keyboards and legacy modem backdoors. And firmware is a prized target, defended by secure boot that blocks unsigned code and measured boot that records the truth of every startup. Lock down the physical layer, and you close the doors that software alone never reaches. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.4. This is the 75th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll turn the spotlight from the server to the endpoint. We'll answer several questions. What actually is a client-side attack? What is mobile code, and why do applets cut both ways? Why does JavaScript deserve special caution? How do browsers try to contain it, and how do local caches get poisoned? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because your users click, and their browsers run other people's code all day long. Picture a sales team browsing supplier sites on their laptops. Every page they open can quietly hand code to their machines. On the job, you are the one who hardens that endpoint and decides what running code is allowed to touch. The client is where the human meets the hostile web, and that is where many breaches begin. So what actually is a client-side attack? It is any attack that targets the client itself rather than the server. Most people picture the server as the prize, but here the client, or a process running on it, is the bullseye. A classic example is a malicious website that pushes harmful code into a vulnerable browser, and it is not limited to web traffic. These attacks can ride any communication protocol, and even the client's local caches can be poisoned. Think of a burglar who ignores the well-guarded warehouse and instead targets the delivery van parked outside it. What is mobile code, and why do applets cut both ways? Mobile code is a small, self-contained program sent from a server to run on the client. An applet is exactly that, code that executes independently on your machine. The appeal is real. Offloading work to the client frees the server, speeds up the response, and can even keep the user's input private by processing it locally. Imagine a loan estimator that runs entirely in your browser, so your financial figures never travel back to the server. But there is a sharp edge. Anytime you run someone else's code, you risk it being malicious or flawed, and short of reading it line by line, you cannot be sure it hides no Trojan or backdoor. Older forms like Java applets and one legacy browser control are largely retired now, but you should still confirm rather than assume they are gone. Think of accepting a sealed gift that does a helpful job while never being certain what else is ticking inside it. Why does JavaScript deserve special caution? Because it is the most widely used web scripting language, embedded directly inside the pages you visit and downloaded automatically with them. It powers the dynamic behavior of nearly every modern site, which is exactly why attackers love it. Since the script arrives inside the page delivered to your browser, a threat actor can build a convincing fake site and tamper with that code to steal or clone your credentials. Attackers have also found ways to break out of the protections meant to contain it. So any script from an untrusted source is a genuine risk to your system. Think of a helpful assistant who reads every note handed to them out loud. Useful, until someone slips in a note that says to read your passwords aloud too. How do browsers try to contain it? Through a couple of built-in guardrails, backed by choices you make. Browsers run scripts inside a sandbox that limits them to web-related actions, and they enforce the same origin policy, which blocks a script from reaching content that comes from a different origin. An origin is the combination of protocol, domain, and port. And if any one of those differs, access is denied. On top of that, you keep browsers updated, lean on hardened script libraries on the server side, and deploy a content security policy that rigidly enforces those origin rules. Watch for injected script in anything a server receives, and remember that turning JavaScript off entirely would break most of the web. Think of a guest allowed only in the lobby, never the back offices, with a posted rule that they may speak only to people from their own company. How do local caches get poisoned? A browser stores downloaded files in a local cache for reuse, and that convenience is also an opening. Certain attacks can trick the client into saving content that was never part of the page you asked for, and once a cached item is poisoned, even a legitimate page that calls on it will trigger the malicious content. The browser is supposed to manage that cache, but its defaults favor speed over safety. So tighten it. Shorten how long files are kept, shrink the cache size, and disable content preloading. You can also clear cookies and cache on exit, or use a tool that wipes temporary files automatically on a schedule. Just know these tighter settings can slow browsing on slow connections. Think of a fridge that keeps leftovers far too long. Cleaning it out often is inconvenient, but it stops something spoiled from making it back onto your plate. So let's bring it together. A client-side attack aims at the endpoint, not the server, and can travel over any protocol. Mobile code and applets offer real performance gains, but force you to trust code you did not write. JavaScript is everywhere and powerful, which makes it a favorite target. So browsers contain it with sandboxing and the same origin policy, while you add updates and a content security policy. And local caches can be poisoned, so manage them tightly rather than trusting the defaults. Treat the client as a frontier, and you defend the place where your users actually live. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.5. This is the 76th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll look at how servers move data and share heavy workloads. We'll answer several questions. What is data flow control, and why does it matter? How does a load balancer help? How do parallel systems split enormous work? What makes grid computing risky? And where does peer-to-peer fit? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because a server that cannot manage its own traffic will collapse under load, whether from an attack or its own success. Picture a ticketing platform on the morning a major concert goes on sale. Millions of requests arrive at once. On the job, you design how that flood is throttled, spread, and absorbed. Get the flow wrong, and the service falls over exactly when it matters most. So what is data flow control, and why does it matter? It is the management of how data moves between processes, across networks, and over channels. Done well, it keeps transmission efficient with low latency, reliable through integrity checks, and confidential through encryption. Crucially, it also keeps receiving systems from being swamped past the point where they drop connections. When data overflows, it can be lost, corrupted, or forced into costly retransmission. So, flow control exists to prevent exactly those failures, and it is provided by devices like routers and switches, as well as network services. Think of a highway with metered on-ramps. The signals release cars at a steady pace so the road never seizes into gridlock. How does a load balancer help? It spreads incoming traffic across several links or servers so no single one is overwhelmed. The goal is better use of your infrastructure, faster response, higher throughput, and no bottlenecks. A common deployment fans requests out across the members of a server farm using techniques like round robin, random choice, or watching real-time utilization to decide where each request goes. Think of a busy checkout area where a coordinator waves shoppers to whichever register has the shortest line. No single cashier drowns while others sit idle. What happens when traffic is malicious? You face a denial of service attack, which can cripple data flow control outright. By flooding a system with bogus traffic, an attacker aims to exhaust its capacity so legitimate users cannot get through. This is why you monitor for these attacks and build in mitigations before they strike. Think of pranksters jamming a pizza shop's phone line with fake orders. Real customers hear a busy signal, and the kitchen grinds to a halt. How do parallel systems split enormous work? They break a huge task into smaller pieces and hand each piece to a different processor to compute at the same time. There are two broad camps. In symmetric multiprocessing, several processors share one operating system, one data bus, and common memory, working together on a single main task. In asymmetric multiprocessing, each processor often runs its own operating system and owns its own memory, and specific tasks can be pinned to specific processors, an arrangement called affinity. A more extreme variation links many asymmetric systems into a massive cluster with hundreds or thousands of processors, ideal for the heaviest scientific and mathematical workloads. Think of a single large team all reading from one shared plan versus a network of independent crews, each running their own playbook on their own slice. What makes grid computing risky? Grid computing loosely pulls many volunteer nodes that join and leave freely, often lending spare capacity while their machines sit idle. That openness is exactly the problem. Because anyone can participate, the contents of each work packet may be exposed to the world, and members could keep and inspect copies. So grids are a poor fit for private or proprietary data. Capacity also swings wildly, and packets can come back late, corrupted, or not at all, which hurts time-sensitive projects. And because a grid leans on central servers to coordinate, overloading or knocking those out can bring the whole thing down. Think of a giant crowdsourced puzzle where anyone can grab a piece, fast and cheap, but you can never be sure who saw the picture or whether they will return their piece. Where does peer-to-peer fit? Peer-to-peer solutions share tasks and workloads directly among equal nodes with no central manager, and they usually deliver service in real time rather than pooling raw computation. Common examples include many voice-over internet services and file distribution tools. The security worries are distinct. There is the pull toward pirating copyrighted material, the chance to eavesdrop on distributed content, the absence of central oversight and filtering, and the risk that the service devours all available bandwidth. Think of an open neighborhood tool lending ring with no librarian. Convenient and direct, but nobody is checking what gets passed around or how much it strains the block. So let's bring it together. Data flow control keeps traffic efficient, reliable, confidential, and, above all, from overwhelming the receiver. A load balancer spreads that traffic so no single server drowns, while a denial of service attack tries to force exactly that drowning. Parallel systems divide massive work, symmetric sharing one brain and asymmetric running many, scaling up to huge clusters. And grid and peer-to-peer models pull distributed effort cheaply at the cost of exposure, inconsistency, and lost central control. Match the model to the sensitivity of the data, and you keep both performance and protection. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.6. This is the 77th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll explore the systems that run our physical world. We'll answer several questions. What is an industrial control system? What are its main forms? And how do they scale? How do these systems talk to each other? Why have they been so poorly secured? And how do you harden them? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these systems do not just move data. They open valves, spin turbines, and run assembly lines. Picture a regional water treatment plant. A compromise here does not leak a spreadsheet. It can taint the water supply for a whole city. On the job, you may inherit decades-old control gear that was never built with attackers in mind. Protecting it is where digital security meets physical safety. So what is an industrial control system? It is a computer-based device that manages industrial processes and machinery, a category often called operational technology. You find these systems running manufacturing lines, power generation and distribution, water and sewage handling, and oil refining. They are the quiet brains behind heavy industry. Think of the nervous system of a factory, sensing conditions and firing the signals that make the machines move. What are its main forms, and how do they scale? There are three you must know, and they climb a ladder of scale. A programmable logic controller is a focused, single-purpose computer that automates one electromechanical job, like driving a stretch of an assembly line or a giant stadium display. A distributed control system links several such controllers within a limited area, spreading control elements across a plant floor, while a central location issues commands and gathers status. And a supervisory control and data acquisition system stretches that reach across vast geographic areas, using a human-machine interface so operators can oversee everything, and it can command those lower controllers beneath it. Here is the clean way to hold it. One controller might run a single transformer, a distributed system manages a whole power station, and the supervisory system watches over an entire power grid. Think of a single traffic light, then a coordinated intersection, then a control room steering traffic across an entire region. How do these systems talk to each other? Largely through a long-established industrial protocol that has become a de facto standard for connecting devices on the plant floor. It gives machines from many different manufacturers a common language to exchange data and commands, which is essential in these mixed environments. That very openness is a double edge. It delivers the interoperability the industry depends on, but an open, widely understood protocol is also easier for an attacker to speak. Think of a universal set of hand signals every worker on a site understands. It keeps the crew in sync, but a stranger who learns the signals can start issuing orders too. Why have they been so poorly secured? Because their static design and bare interfaces once seemed protection enough, so little real security was built in. For years that assumption held, until it did not. There have been serious, well-known compromises, including a landmark piece of malware that planted the first known rootkit inside a control system at a nuclear facility. That was a wake-up call, and vendors have since started adding protections. Yet in practice, many of these systems remain weakly defended, rarely patched, and full of older versions that were never designed with security in mind. Think of a factory built long before anyone locked the gates. now sitting in a neighborhood where the threats have very much arrived. How do you harden them? You apply solid, familiar security discipline tuned to their reality. Isolate the control networks from general traffic, restrict access both physically and logically, and allow only the essential applications to run. Change the default credentials that ship with the gear, and log all activity so you can see what happened. But there is a crucial shift in priorities here. In ordinary IT, we often lead with confidentiality. For operational technology, the top concern is availability. The uninterrupted flow of real-time control signals, because a paused signal can mean a physical disaster. A set of recognized industry and government standards exists to guide this work. Think of the difference between guarding a filing cabinet and guarding a moving crane. With the crane, the one thing you can never allow is for the controls to freeze mid-lift. So let's bring it together. An industrial control system is the computer brain behind physical processes, the heart of operational technology. Its three forms scale up a ladder, from a single controller to a distributed system across a plant, to a supervisory system spanning an entire grid. A common open protocol lets mixed devices talk at the cost of easy access for attackers. These systems were long left insecure, as real-world compromises proved. So you harden them with isolation, access limits, credential changes, and logging. And above all, you protect availability. Because here, a frozen control signal is not an inconvenience, it is a hazard. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 9.7. This is the 78th session of the CISSP Exam Prep Series. In this session, we'll study systems that behave as one but are made of many. We'll answer several questions. What is a distributed computing environment? What everyday technologies rely on it? How do its parts speak across different languages and locations? What makes it especially risky? And how do you actually secure it? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because so much of what you protect is no longer a single box. Picture a global streaming service, its login, its catalog, its recommendations, and its playback all live on separate systems scattered across continents. Yet the user sees one smooth app. On the job, your job is to secure the seams between those pieces, not just the pieces themselves. In a distributed world, the connections are the attack surface. So, what is a distributed computing environment? It is a collection of individual systems working together to deliver one service. So users perceive a single entity rather than many separate servers. These environments coordinate their members toward a shared goal and are built for resilience, reliability, performance, and scalability. Often tolerating the failure of individual parts, they come in several shapes, from classic client-server to layered web architectures with multiple tiers, to peer-to-peer designs like file-sharing networks and blockchain ledgers. Think of a large restaurant chain that feels like one brand to every diner, even though each location, kitchen, and supplier runs on its own. What everyday technologies rely on it? Far more than most people realize. The backbone of the modern internet leans on this model, including name resolution, single sign-on, directory services, mobile networks, massively multiplayer games, and most of the websites you touch daily. It also makes possible advanced designs like service-oriented architecture, software-defined networking, and microservices. Think of the electrical grid behind a city. You never see it, but nearly everything you use is quietly plugged into it. How do its parts speak across different languages and locations? Through an interface definition language, a neutral way to describe how client and server components talk to one another. Its power is that it is independent of both programming language and physical location, so objects written in different languages and running in different places can still connect. Several well-known frameworks provide this kind of glue. Think of a skilled interpreter at an international summit. Each delegate speaks their own tongue from their own seat, yet the interpreter lets them all conduct one shared conversation. What makes it especially risky? the very interconnectedness that gives it power. Because the components are tightly linked, an error or a piece of malware can propagate from one part to the next, and an attacker who compromises a single component can pivot and move laterally to reach the others. On top of that sit the familiar dangers, magnified here. Unauthorized access, impersonation and spoofing, bypassed or disabled controls, eavesdropping and manipulation of traffic, weak authentication and authorization, and gaps in monitoring, logging, and accountability. None of these are unique to distributed systems, but they bite much harder when everything is connected. Think of a row of houses that share their attics. A fire that starts in one can race straight through to every home on the block. How do you actually secure it? You start by respecting the enlarged attack surface. Because members are spread out, sometimes across the globe, you must weigh the threats to each component and to every connection between them. Encryption is essential across storage, transmission, and even processing, and strong multi-factor authentication should be the norm. Watch out for heterogeneity, because a mix of different operating systems, versions, or patch levels multiplies the work of keeping configuration and monitoring consistent. And if your environment sprawls across national borders, you must fold in data sovereignty, since the laws of each country reach the data that lands there. Think of protecting a convoy of trucks crossing many countries. You guard each truck, but also every stretch of road between them, and you obey the laws of every border you cross. So let's bring it together. A distributed computing environment is many systems acting as one, built for resilience and scale across varied architectures. It quietly powers the internet, from name resolution and single sign-on to microservices, and its parts communicate through a language-neutral, location-neutral interface. Its greatest strength, deep interconnection, is also its greatest risk, opening the door to propagation, pivoting, and a wide attack surface. So you secure it with encryption everywhere, strong multi-factor authentication, careful handling of mixed components, and attention to data sovereignty. Guard the connections as fiercely as the nodes, and the whole system holds. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 9.8. This is the 79th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll look at high-performance computing systems. We'll answer 4 questions. What is high-performance computing, and where do you actually meet it? What 3 pieces have to work in balance? What is a benign denial of service, and why does it matter? And how do you keep these platforms healthy? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these systems sit under things you already depend on. Picture a weather agency modeling a hurricane, a bank scoring fraud in milliseconds, and a studio rendering a film overnight. Each one leans on raw computing muscle to deliver on time. When you understand how these platforms are built, you can spot where they break and defend them before the workload stalls. So what exactly is high-performance computing? It is a platform built to crunch huge calculations or process massive data at extreme speed. Supercomputers and massively parallel systems are the classic examples. You reach for them when a task needs results in real time or close to it. Scientific research, medical analysis, voice assistance, and machine learning all ride on this horsepower. Think of it as a fleet of engines working the same job at once instead of one engine straining alone. What 3 pieces have to work in balance? Every high-performance setup rests on compute power, network capacity, and storage. The catch is that they must match each other. If storage is too slow, it cannot feed data to the processors fast enough. If the network is too thin, users hit latency or the whole thing chokes. Picture a busy kitchen. Fast cooks are useless if the pantry is slow or the servers cannot carry the plates out. What is a benign denial of service, and why does it matter? It is an outage that no attacker caused. The service simply runs out of headroom. Maybe traffic spiked because something got popular, or a drive failed, or a config went bad, or a network link dropped. Nobody attacked you. The system just met a load it was never sized for. It teaches an important lesson. Availability can collapse from honest mistakes and plain bad luck, not only from malice. How do you keep these platforms healthy? You size every layer to the real workload and keep the three pieces in proportion. You add capacity before demand outgrows it, and you watch for the early signs of strain. Since datasets and connected devices keep multiplying, demand for this horsepower will only climb. Plan for that growth, or a benign outage will plan it for you. So let's bring it together. High-performance computing crunches enormous workloads at extreme speed for science, industry, and everyday services. It stands on three matched pillars: compute, network, and storage, and each must keep pace with the others. A benign denial of service reminds you that availability can fail with no attacker in sight. Size for the load, watch for strain, and plan for relentless growth. Get that right, and the horsepower stays available when the work arrives. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.9. This is the 80th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll unpack real-time operating systems. We'll answer 4 questions. What is a real-time operating system, and what is it built to do? What is the difference between hard and soft real-time? How does it decide what to run next? And what security risks come with these systems? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these systems run the things that cannot wait. Picture an insulin pump dosing a patient, a factory robot arm on a moving line, and a drone holding its position in wind. Each one must react the instant data arrives, with no lag. When you understand how these systems trade features for speed, you can see exactly where their security thins out. So, what is a real-time operating system? It is an operating system built to handle data the moment it arrives, with almost no delay. It usually lives in read-only memory, so it boots fast and stays fixed. The whole design bends toward predictable timing above everything else. Think of a reflex, not a decision. Your hand pulls back from a hot stove before your brain finishes the thought. That is the kind of instant, guaranteed response these systems aim for. What is the difference between hard and soft real-time? It comes down to how much delay you can tolerate. A hard real-time system allows essentially none, because lag could hurt someone. A self-driving car braking for a pedestrian lives here. A soft real-time system accepts a little slack under normal conditions. The tiny lag between a stylus and the line it draws on screen is fine. Same goal of speed, but very different stakes when the clock slips. How does a real-time system decide what to run next? It uses one of 2 switching styles. An event-driven system jumps between tasks based on preset priorities, so the most urgent job wins. A time-sharing system switches on a clock, giving each task a fixed slice of time. You choose one when timing and scheduling are the single most critical part of the job. Picture a traffic controller who either reacts to whichever emergency is loudest or works a strict rotation. What security risks come with these systems? The trouble is that they are lean and single-minded, so there is little room left for defense. They often run custom or proprietary code, which can hide unknown bugs waiting to be found. An attacker may flood one with junk data or bogus requests to overload it and knock it off its timing. So you wall these systems off, use isolation and watch their communications closely to catch abuse early. So let's bring it together. A real-time operating system processes data the instant it arrives, with timing as its top priority. Hard real-time forbids delay where safety is on the line, while soft real-time tolerates a little slack. It switches tasks by priority when event-driven, or by the clock when time-sharing. Its lean, purpose-built design leaves scarce room for security, so you isolate it and monitor its traffic. Respect the timing and guard the gaps that speed leaves behind. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.10. This is the 81st session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll examine the Internet of Things. We'll answer several questions. What is the Internet of Things? And how does it differ from an embedded system? Why are these devices such a security problem? How do you deploy them safely? What should you weigh with wearables and sensors? Why should every organization care? And what is the industrial version? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these gadgets are already inside your walls. Picture a smart thermostat on the office network, a connected badge reader at the door, and an employee's fitness watch syncing over your Wi-Fi. Each one is a tiny computer you did not fully vet. When you learn to treat these devices as real endpoints, you close doors that most organizations leave wide open. So what is the Internet of Things? And how does it differ from an embedded system? The Internet of Things is a class of connected smart devices that add automation, remote control, or intelligence to ordinary appliances. Think smart thermostats, home assistants, and connected cameras. The key exam distinction is this. An Internet of Things device is its own separate hardware, used on its own or bolted onto an existing system. An embedded system is baked right into a larger machine, sharing its chassis, standalone gadget versus built-in brain. Why are these devices such a security problem? Because most were never designed with security in mind, not even as an afterthought. That gap has caused countless home and office breaches. Worse, once an attacker gets into or through one of these devices, they can often reach everything else on the same network. Picture a cheap smart plug as an unlocked side door. Nobody guards it, yet it opens onto the whole house. How do you deploy these devices safely? You start by putting them on their own isolated network segment, walled off from your main network. That way, a compromised gadget stays trapped in its own pen. Then you apply the same discipline you already know. Keep them patched, limit who can reach them, monitor their activity, and put firewalls and filtering in front. And before you buy, judge both the device and the reputation of the vendor behind it. What should you weigh with wearables and sensors? Wearables like smartwatches and fitness trackers are personal spin-offs of these devices, and they raise sharp data questions. Where does the collected data live, and is it kept private? Is the link to the collection service encrypted? Can you fully delete your data if you walk away? Sensors are the workhorse in business, measuring temperature, motion, humidity, and more. They often feed cyber-physical systems that act on what they read, like cooling a room when it heats up. One more rule holds across all of them. Never trust the defaults, and always change default passwords. Why should every organization care about all this? Because these devices are woven through the modern workplace. Employees carry mobile devices onto your network. Your building runs on connected controls for heating, lighting, door locks, smoke detection, and even auto-reordering supplies. Every one of those is a network device that needs security oversight, just like your servers. Treat them as part of the attack surface, because they are. And what is the industrial version? It is the industrial Internet of Things, a heavier branch aimed at manufacturing, engineering, and infrastructure. It evolves older industrial control systems by folding in cloud services for data collection, analysis, and automation. Edge computing and fog computing, which come next, are examples of it. Same core idea, but scaled up to run factories and power grids instead of living rooms. So let's bring it together. The Internet of Things is standalone, smart hardware, distinct from an embedded system built into a machine. Its weak security has caused real breaches, and one compromised device can expose your whole network. So isolate these devices on their own segment, patch and monitor them, and vet the vendor. Question where wearable and sensor data goes, and never trust the defaults. Every organization owns this risk, and the industrial version scales it up. Treat these gadgets as the real endpoints they are. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.11. This is the 82nd session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll compare edge and fog computing. We'll answer 4 questions. What is edge computing, and why move processing outward? How does edge fit the long arc of computing history? What is fog computing, and where does it put the brains? And how do edge and fog differ side by side? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because where you place processing shapes both speed and security. Picture a self-driving car deciding to brake, a chain of stores tracking shelf sensors, and a video call that must stay smooth. Each one wins or loses on where the computing happens. When you can reason about that placement, you design systems that stay fast without shipping every byte to a distant data center. So what is edge computing, and why move processing outward? Edge computing is a design where data and compute sit as close together as possible. Instead of hauling data to a central brain, each device does its own thinking right where it stands. That cuts latency and saves bandwidth because the work happens near the source. Think of a smart camera that decides on its own whether it saw a person rather than streaming every frame away for a verdict. How does edge fit the long arc of computing history? It is the newest turn in a long swing between central and local. First came mainframes, where everything ran on one core machine and thin clients just displayed the results. Then client-server pushed real work out to endpoints. Then virtualization gave us cloud, pulling computing back to remote data centers. Edge completes the loop. Control stays central, but the actual execution moves back out to the edge, right next to the user. What is fog computing, and where does it put the brains? Fog computing gathers data from many scattered sensors and devices, then hands it to a central point for processing. That processing point sits inside the local network, not out in a far data center. So the intelligence is pooled in the local network, chewing through everything the scattered devices report. Picture a warehouse where hundreds of sensors feed one nearby server that makes sense of the whole floor at once. So how do edge and fog differ side by side? The split is simply where the thinking happens. In edge computing, each distributed device processes its own data on the spot. In fog computing, the distributed devices only collect, and a central node in the local network does the processing. Both often lean on the same building blocks, like microcontrollers, embedded devices, and connected sensors. Edge is many small brains at the ends. Fog is one shared brain in the middle. So let's bring it together. Edge computing places compute right next to the data to cut latency and save bandwidth, with each device thinking for itself. It is the latest swing in the arc from mainframe to client-server to cloud, returning execution to the edge while control stays central. Fog computing instead collects from scattered devices and processes in one spot inside the local network. The clean contrast is distributed processing at the edge versus centralized processing in the fog. Choose the placement that fits your latency, bandwidth, and trust needs. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.12. This is the 83rd session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll work through embedded devices and cyber-physical systems. We'll answer several questions. What is an embedded system? What is a microcontroller? What is a static system? What are cyber-physical systems? Why do their built-in constraints create risk? And how do you actually secure this whole family? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these devices quietly run the physical world around you. Picture an elevator controller, a hospital infusion pump, and the check-in kiosk at an airport. Each is a small, fixed computer that touches real people and real machinery. When one of these fails or is tampered with, the harm is not just data loss. It can be physical. Learning to secure them protects both bytes and bodies. So what is an embedded system? It is a computing component added into an existing mechanical or electrical device to give it automation, remote control, or monitoring. It is designed around a narrow set of functions tied to the larger product it lives inside. Think of the tiny brain inside a washing machine or a smart doorbell. It is not a general computer. It exists to run one machine well. What is a microcontroller? It is a small, self-contained computer on a single chip. simpler than a full system on a chip, but often part of one. It packs a processor, memory, storage, and input and output ports into one tiny package. Familiar examples include Raspberry Pi and Arduino boards. Picture a whole miniature computer shrunk onto something the size of a stamp, cheap enough to embed almost anywhere. What is a static system? It is an environment deliberately built to never change once it is set. The goal is to stop users and even administrators from making changes that could weaken security or break operation. Airport check-in kiosks, ATMs, and library guest computers are classic examples. When a session ends, the machine wipes everything and restores a clean, pristine state for the next person. One warning though, no system is ever truly static. A bug, a failed part, or an exploit can still shift it. What are cyber-physical systems? These are devices that use computation to control something in the real, physical world. If a device makes something move, it is acting like a robot. If it senses conditions like temperature or motion, it is acting like a sensor. Robotic surgery, collision avoidance in cars, and prosthetic limbs all fit here. The label puts the spotlight on the physical result, not the code behind it. That is why a breach here can cause real harm. Why do their built-in constraints create risk? Because these devices are stripped down to save cost and power, and that thinness eats into security. Limited power caps how much protection they can run, and pushing them can overheat and destroy them. Weak processors leave few cycles for security work. Many can barely handle encryption, sometimes relying on hard-coded keys. Some cannot be patched at all. Some have no real authentication, and some ship with baked-in credentials. And when you use one, you are quietly trusting the vendor and their cloud behind it. That trust may be misplaced. So how do you secure this whole family? You layer several controls, since no single one is enough. Segment the network so these devices are penned off and an exploit cannot spread to them. Stack firewalls in series, from network appliances down to application and internal segmentation firewalls, so they complement each other. Group devices into security layers by sensitivity and use physical or logical isolation, even air gaps between levels. Apply firmware and software updates only manually after careful testing so no untested change slips in. Monitor everything for performance, violations, and compliance. This layered defense is your safeguard because every single control has a flaw waiting to be found. So let's bring it together. An embedded system is a fixed brain built into a larger machine, often powered by a tiny microcontroller. A static system is locked to resist change and resets to a clean state. Though nothing is ever perfectly static, cyber-physical systems reach into the real world, which raises the stakes. Their cost-driven constraints, from weak processors to hard-coded keys, thin out their defenses. So you segment, layer firewalls, isolate by sensitivity, update manually, and monitor constantly. Defense in depth is what keeps these limited devices safe. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.13. This is the 84th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll break down microservices. We'll answer several questions. Why do integrated architectures raise new risks? What is a microservices architecture? What role do the connecting interfaces play? Why do teams choose this style? And what security concerns come with it? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because modern applications are stitched together from many moving parts, and each seam is a chance for a gap. Picture a streaming service where sign-in, billing, and recommendations are separate pieces. If any one of them is weak, the whole experience is exposed. When you understand how these pieces connect, you can secure the joints instead of just the parts. So why do integrated architectures raise new risks? Because when you wire many technologies and processes together, fresh weaknesses appear that none of the pieces had alone. Bolt existing services into a new application and you create something novel with security that is untested and unproven. Watch especially for single points of failure and for weak spots that emerge only once the parts interact. So vet every new deployment thoroughly before it ever reaches production or the public internet. Think of a bridge assembled from strong beams. The beams may be sound, yet the joints are where it fails. So what is a microservices architecture? It is a style where an application is built as a collection of small, independent, loosely coupled services. Each microservice handles one specific business capability and runs as a self-contained unit with its own data and its own way of communicating. You can build, update, and scale each one without disturbing the rest. Picture a food court instead of a single giant kitchen. Each stall cooks one dish well and can open, close, or change on its own. What role do the connecting interfaces play? They are the language the services speak to each other. Each microservice exposes a well-defined interface that says exactly how others may request or change its data. These interfaces are the channels that let the services coordinate and work as one larger application. Because each interface is clearly defined, a service can be developed and deployed on its own. Think of them as clear menus at each food stall, telling everyone precisely what they can order and how. Why do teams choose this style? Because it turns one giant, tangled system into small, self-contained functions that are far easier to manage. It also lets multiple teams build separate services at the same time, without stepping on each other. That means more flexibility, faster delivery, and cleaner scaling. Each capability can grow or be replaced on its own. It is the difference between one crowded kitchen and many independent stalls that can each expand when demand rises. What security concerns come with this style? The strength of this design, its distributed and interconnected nature, is also its exposure. So you secure every service and every connection between them. Enforce strong authentication and authorization, so only trusted users and services get in. Encrypt data both moving between services and sitting at rest. Lock down the interfaces, often behind a gateway that manages and protects them. Build in thorough monitoring and logging to catch anomalies fast. And if you package services in containers, secure those images, configurations, and running behavior too. Every seam needs a guard. So let's bring it together. Wiring many parts together creates new, untested weaknesses, especially at the joints and single points of failure. Microservices split an application into small, independent services, each owning one capability with its own data. Their interfaces are the well-defined channels that let them coordinate and deploy on their own. Teams choose this style for flexibility, parallel work, and clean scaling. But its distributed nature means you must secure authentication, encryption, interfaces, monitoring, and containers. Protect the seams, and the whole system holds. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.14. This is the 85th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll explore infrastructure as code. We'll answer 3 questions. What is infrastructure as code, and what mindset does it change? How does managing hardware like software actually pay off? And how far does this approach reach? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because it turns fragile, hand-built environments into something repeatable and reviewable. Picture a team that used to configure each server by hand, clicking through settings and hoping they matched. Now imagine that same setup written down, tested, and deployed identically every time. When you grasp this shift, you can build infrastructure that is consistent, auditable, and far harder to quietly break. So what is infrastructure as code? And what mindset does it change? It is a shift in how you think about hardware management. Instead of treating configuration as a manual, hands-on chore done one machine at a time, you treat your infrastructure as just another set of things to manage, like software. It lives under a development, security, and operations approach, folding security into the pipeline. Think of it as writing your environment down as a recipe, rather than cooking from memory each time. How does managing hardware like software actually pay off? Because everything you already do for good code now applies to your infrastructure. You get version control, so every change is tracked and reversible. You get pre-deployment testing, custom checks, and regression testing to catch problems before they ship. You get consistency across a whole distributed environment. It relies on machine-readable definition files and rule sets to roll out settings quickly and identically. The result is change that is faster, more reliable, and more secure than hand configuration ever was. How far does this approach reach? Further than physical hardware alone. The same method manages virtual machines, storage area networks, and software-defined networking. So the whole fabric underneath your applications, real or virtual, can be defined, tested, and deployed as code. Picture one consistent blueprint governing servers, storage, and networking alike, instead of 3 separate manual processes. So let's bring it together. Infrastructure as code reframes hardware from a manual chore into something managed like software inside a development, security, and operations pipeline. That unlocks version control, testing, and consistency across a distributed environment using machine-readable definition files. The payoff is change that is faster, more reliable, and more secure. And it stretches beyond physical hardware to virtual machines, storage networks, and software-defined networking. Write your environment down, and you can trust it every time. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.15. This is the 86th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll unpack Immutable Architecture. We'll answer 4 questions. What is Immutable Architecture? What do you actually gain from it? How does the pets versus cattle mindset explain it? And what is software-defined networking's connection to it? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because it changes how you handle failure and change in production. Picture a fleet of web servers behind a load balancer. In the old way, you would log in and patch each one live, hoping nothing breaks. In the immutable way, you never touch a running server. You build a fresh one and swap it in. When you understand this, you can deploy changes that are predictable and clean, with far less risk of a mystery outage. So what is immutable architecture? It is the idea that a server never changes once it is deployed. When you need to update, fix, or modify it, you do not edit the live machine. Instead, you build a brand new server, apply the changes there, and deploy that one to replace the original. Once the replacement is validated, you retire the old one and reuse its hardware. Think of it as replacing a whole appliance rather than repairing it in place. What do you actually gain from it? Reliability, consistency, and a deployment process you can predict. Because you never patch a running system, you sidestep the classic problems of mutable setups. Those midstream edits are what cause surprise downtime, data loss, and incompatibility. Every server that goes live is built the same clean way, so there are no drifting, one-off configurations hiding in your fleet. You trade in-place tinkering for a repeatable, dependable swap. How does the pets versus cattle mindset explain it? It is the classic analogy for this shift. When a server is a pet, you name it and rush to nurse it back to health when it gets sick. When a server is cattle, you simply remove the unhealthy one from the herd and bring in a replacement. There is a matching pair, snowflakes versus phoenixes. A snowflake is a unique, hand-tuned server that demands special care and adds complexity. A phoenix is built fresh from scratch every time, rising with improvements baked in, which cuts overhead and keeps everything consistent. Immutable architecture wants cattle and phoenixes, not pets and snowflakes. What is software-defined networking's connection to it? Software-defined networking is a close relative. Managing your network as a virtual software resource, even though real hardware still carries the traffic. Just as infrastructure as code treats hardware like software, software-defined networking treats your whole network the same way. It is a blend of hardware and software elements built to virtualize how networking is managed and controlled. So the same code-driven, replace, do not edit spirit reaches into the network itself. So let's bring it together. Immutable architecture means a deployed server never changes. When you need a change, you build and validate a fresh server, swap it in, and retire the old one. You gain reliability, consistency, and predictable deployments, free of the downtime and drift that live edits cause. The pets versus cattle and snowflakes versus phoenixes analogies capture the mindset, favoring disposable, rebuilt systems over hand-nursed unique ones. And software-defined networking carries that same virtualized, code-driven spirit into the network. Replace, do not repair. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.16, part 1. This is the 87th session of the CISSP exam prep series. In this session, we'll build up virtualized systems from the ground. We'll answer several questions. What is virtualization? And why do organizations adopt it? What is the hypervisor? And what are the two types? How does cloud grow out of virtualization? What are the everyday benefits? What is the difference between elasticity and scalability? What security advantages does it bring? And how does virtualization extend to software and networks? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because nearly everything you run today sits on top of virtualization. Picture a company that once filled a room with physical servers, now consolidated onto a handful of machines. Picture a tester spinning up a throwaway environment in seconds, then discarding it. When you understand the layer underneath all of this, you can secure it deliberately instead of trusting it blindly. So what is virtualization, and why do organizations adopt it? Virtualization lets you run one or more operating systems inside the memory of a single physical host. It also lets you run software that would not otherwise fit the host system. Almost any operating system can run on almost any hardware, and many can run side by side at once. The big driver is cost. One organization might collapse 100 physical servers down to 10, each hosting 10 virtual ones. That slashes power, cooling, and overall operating costs. Think of it as many tenants sharing one well-run building. So what is the hypervisor, and what are the two types? The hypervisor, also called the virtual machine monitor, is the engine that creates, runs, and manages the virtual machines. The physical machine is the host, and the systems running inside are the guests. There are two types. A Type 1 hypervisor is bare metal. It installs straight onto the hardware with no host operating system, which maximizes resources and is the common choice for server virtualization. A Type 2 hypervisor is hosted. It runs as an application on top of a normal operating system, and it suits desktops, where guests act as safe sandboxes for testing or legacy apps. How does cloud grow out of virtualization? Cloud computing is the natural next step from virtualization, the internet, and distributed architecture, driven by the need to reach data and resources from anywhere. But moving there raises real questions you must weigh. Think privacy, regulatory compliance, open versus closed source choices, adoption of open standards, and whether the data is truly secured or even securable. So cloud gives you reach, but it hands you a fresh set of trust decisions. What are the everyday benefits of virtualization? You can launch fresh instances of servers or services exactly when you need them, scale in real time, and run the precise operating system version and application demands. From a user's seat, virtual servers are indistinguishable from physical ones. Recovery is fast, often just swapping a corrupted virtual system's drive file for a clean backup and relaunching. It even lets you keep end-of-life systems running safely to support legacy business applications. Flexibility, speed, and a soft landing when something breaks. What is the difference between elasticity and scalability? They sound alike but describe different things. Elasticity is expanding or contracting resources to meet the demand of the moment. When a heavy job launches inside a virtual machine, it can grab spare host capacity, then release it the instant the work finishes. Scalability is the ability to take on more total work over time. Elasticity is short-term and resource-focused. Scalability is long-term and growth-focused. A scalable system must also be elastic, but an elastic one need not be scalable. Think of elasticity as flexing for today's load, and scalability as room to grow for tomorrow. What security advantages does virtualization bring? Several, and they are worth knowing. Backing up a whole virtual system is often faster than backing up its physical twin. Snapshots, also called checkpoints, are backups of a virtual machine, and when something goes wrong, you can restore one in minutes. Better still, malware that infects a guest rarely reaches the host, thanks to the hypervisor's isolation between guests and between guest and host. That isolation makes virtualization a safe place to test and experiment. A blast wall between the tenants keeps trouble from spreading. How does virtualization extend to software and networks? It reaches well past whole operating systems. A virtual application is packaged so it believes it is talking to a full host, while it is really boxed off in a sandbox. Its changes are intercepted and recorded, never touching the real system, and it can often become portable across machines. Virtualization also reshapes networking. A virtualized network fuses hardware and software into one entity you control entirely through software, managing traffic, addressing, and more from a single console. Guests can even live on network segments that exist only virtually. Same core idea, now applied to apps and to the network fabric itself. So, let's bring it together. Virtualization runs many operating systems on one host, mainly to cut cost. The hypervisor manages the guests in a bare metal Type 1 form or a hosted Type 2 form. Cloud extends virtualization but adds trust and compliance questions. The everyday wins are on-demand instances, fast recovery, and legacy support, while elasticity flexes for now and scalability grows for later. On security, snapshots and hypervisor isolation contain damage and enable safe testing. And the same idea stretches into virtual applications and virtual networks. Master this layer, and you can defend everything built on top of it. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.16, part 2. This is the 88th session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part continues our tour of virtualization, moving from the building blocks into the wider software-defined world and how you keep it all secure. In this session, we'll cover the rest of the virtualization story. What does it mean to run everything as software? What are virtual desktops and thin clients? How does software-defined visibility in data centers fit in? How do you actually manage the security of virtual systems? What is VM sprawl, and where does shadow IT creep in? And what happens when a guest breaks out of its box? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because your fleet is quietly turning into software. Picture a regional insurer that swaps racks of aging desktops for a central virtual environment. Suddenly storage, networking, and even employee workstations are all just files on a server. That agility is a gift, but every one of those virtual pieces still needs patching, isolation, and oversight. You are the person who makes sure the convenience does not become the breach. So what does it mean to run everything as software? This is the idea behind software-defined everything. The trend is simple. Take a piece of hardware and replace it with a software equivalent built on virtualization. Networking, storage, visibility, even whole data centers can become software you spin up and tear down on demand. Think of it like moving from a garage full of physical tools to a single tablet that can become any tool you need. The flexibility is huge, but so is the new attack surface. What are virtual desktops and thin clients? A virtual desktop infrastructure hosts each user's workstation as a virtual machine on a central server. People connect in from almost any device and see their familiar desktop. Some desktops are persistent, saving each user's customizations, and some are non-persistent, resetting to a clean state at every logoff. When you virtualize the mobile operating system itself on the server, that variation is called virtual mobile infrastructure. A thin client is the lightweight endpoint that connects to all this. It handles the screen, keyboard, and mouse, while the real computing happens back on the server. Picture a hotel room television. The screen is local, but the show streams from somewhere else entirely. How do software-defined visibility and data centers fit in? Software-defined visibility is a framework that automates network monitoring and response. The goal is to inspect every packet and make smart, automated decisions about forwarding, dropping, or reacting to a threat. It gives security teams and managed service providers a single pane of oversight across on-premises and cloud. A software-defined data center takes the idea to its limit. It replaces the physical elements of a whole data center with virtual services, often delivered by a cloud provider. Think of it as renting a fully furnished, ready-to-use office instead of buying the building and every desk yourself. How do you actually manage the security of virtual systems? Start with the hypervisor. The software that runs your virtual machines. It is an extra layer, so it is an extra attack surface, and compromising the physical host can expose every guest on it. Harden that host and use it for nothing but hosting. Then remember that virtualization does not erase the basics. Each guest operating system still needs its own patches, and so does the hypervisor. Keep tested backups and snapshots so you can roll back cleanly, and test the virtual systems just like physical ones, with vulnerability scans and penetration testing. Treat the host like the foundation of a building. If it cracks, every floor above it comes down. What is VM sprawl? And where does shadow IT creep in? Virtual machines are so easy to clone that they multiply faster than anyone can track. That is VM sprawl. Dozens of virtual systems running with no real oversight, each carrying the same licensing and patching burden as a physical one. The fix is a firm policy for how machines are built, plus a library of approved base images to deploy from. This connects to shadow IT, technology stood up by a team without the knowledge of management or the security group. Shadow IT skips your policies, misses patches, and quietly leaks sensitive data. Think of a spare fridge someone plugs in behind a filing cabinet. Nobody budgeted for it, nobody cleans it, and eventually something inside goes very wrong. What happens when a guest breaks out of its box? That is VM escaping. Software inside one guest defeats the isolation the hypervisor is supposed to enforce, reaching into other guests or the host itself. A well-known flaw exploited a shared virtual floppy driver to let malicious code jump between machines. The consequences can be severe, so defend in layers. Keep your most sensitive systems on separate physical hardware so isolation is real, not just logical. Patch every hypervisor the moment fixes arrive, and watch threat feeds for new escape techniques targeting your platform. Think of it as prisoners tunneling between cells. The stronger your walls, and the faster you spot fresh tunnels, the safer everyone stays. So let's bring it together. Software-defined, everything turns hardware into flexible software you provision on demand. Virtual desktops and thin clients centralize computing, while software-defined visibility and data centers extend the model to monitoring and whole facilities. Managing it all still means hardening the host, patching every guest and hypervisor, backing up, and testing. Watch for VM sprawl and shadow IT growing in the shadows, and defend against VM escaping with real isolation and fast patching. Get these habits right, and virtualization stays a strength rather than a soft spot. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.17. This is the 89th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll unpack containerization. What is it, and how does it differ from traditional virtual machines? Why does it pack so much more onto a single server? And what makes containers so portable and flexible? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because containers are how modern software actually ships. Picture a streaming startup that pushes updates several times a day. Each small service rides inside its own container, identical from a developer's laptop to the production cloud. When you understand what a container shares and what it isolates, you can secure that pipeline instead of just trusting it. So what is containerization? And how does it differ from virtual machines? A traditional virtual machine runs a full guest operating system on top of a hypervisor, and each machine usually carries just one main application. That means the same operating system gets duplicated over and over, which wastes resources. Containerization, sometimes called operating system virtualization, strips out that duplication. Each application goes into a container holding only what that specific app needs, while the shared operating system parts live once in a common container engine. Some setups drop the hypervisor entirely and let containers call on a shared set of binaries and libraries. Think of apartments in one building sharing the plumbing and foundation, instead of everyone building a separate house. Why does containerization pack so much more onto a single server? Because you are no longer paying the overhead of a full operating system for every workload. By sharing common components instead of copying them, a single physical server can host far more applications than classic hypervisor virtualization allows, on the order of 10 to 100 times the density. Picture a parking garage. Give every car its own private lot and you fit a handful. Stack them efficiently in shared levels and you fit hundreds in the same footprint. What makes containers so portable and flexible? Applications get wrapped in application cells, also called application containers. So the same packaged software can run on almost any operating system. That portability is the whole point. A container built once behaves the same wherever it lands. The technologies grouped under containerization vary in the details. Some allow several applications to share one container, while others keep it to one app each, and many let you tune exactly how much containers are allowed to interact with one another. Think of shipping containers. The standard box fits any truck, train, or vessel, and you decide how tightly the cargo inside is sealed off. So let's bring it together. Containerization removes the wasteful duplication of running a full operating system per workload. Instead, each app carries only what it needs, while shared elements sit in a common engine. That efficiency delivers dramatically higher application density on the same hardware. And because containers are portable and configurable, the same package runs almost anywhere, with control over how much the pieces interact. Grasp this model, and the cloud and DevOps material later in the series will click into place. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.18, part 1. This is the 90th session of the CISSP exam prep series. In this session, we'll cover the risks that mobile devices bring and the on-device features that tame them. Why are mobile devices such a security headache? What sets Android and iOS apart? How do you manage a whole fleet of them? How does a device prove who is holding it? Why does full device encryption matter? How do you protect calls and messages? What do you do when a device is lost? And how do screen locks, lockout, and location services help or hurt? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these devices walk in and out of your building every single day. Picture a consulting firm where every analyst carries a phone full of client contacts, contracts, and email. One left in a taxi could hand a competitor everything. Your job is to make sure that lost phone is a shrug, not a headline. That comes from the features and policies we are about to walk through. So why are mobile devices such a security headache? Because they combine huge capability with weak default protection. Many run stripped-down operating systems that never got the decades of security hardening a desktop received. They hold contacts, messages, email, documents, and cameras that can capture sensitive scenes in a second. They also become smuggling tools. A malicious insider can carry code in on a phone or memory card, then carry stolen data right back out. And do not forget eavesdropping, since conversations can be overheard or even tapped. Treat every mobile device as a tiny, mobile branch office that could leak. What sets Android and iOS apart? They represent two philosophies. Android is built on Linux and is highly open, letting users install from official and unknown sources and even replace the operating system itself. That openness invites malicious apps, hostile scripts, and insecure data transfers, though updates and add-on tools steadily improve it. There is even a hardened variant that brings mandatory access control, app sandboxing, and blocks on privilege escalation. Apple's iOS takes the opposite road. It runs only on Apple hardware, so Apple controls the whole experience, and apps come through its official store. Think of Android as a house you can renovate freely, and iOS as a well-guarded apartment where the landlord sets the rules. How do you manage a whole fleet of these devices? You register them with a central management system. Mobile device management lets you push or pull apps, enforce configuration, and keep devices patched, whether they connect over the carrier network or Wi-Fi, and whether the company owns them or the employee does. The newer, broader approach is unified endpoint management, which controls phones, laptops, wearables, and industrial devices from one platform, replacing several older tools at once. Think of it as an air traffic control tower for every gadget that touches your network. Nothing flies unmanaged. How does a device prove who is holding it? Through real device authentication, not a lazy swipe or pattern. Whenever you can, require a password, a personal identification number, a face or fingerprint scan, or a proximity token. Pair that authentication with encryption so no one can pull data off through a cable while the screen is locked. For online services, layer on multi-factor authentication combined with context-aware authentication. Context-aware means the system weighs where and how you are connecting. A login from your usual phone inside the office is low risk and waved through, while an attempt from an unknown device in a strange location triggers a tougher challenge. Think of a doorman who nods you in on a normal day but demands extra proof when something looks off. Why does full device encryption matter? Because it turns a lost device into a locked safe. When storage is encrypted and the screen locks, the physical data port shuts down, blocking anyone from siphoning data through a cable. Many devices ship pre-encrypted or let the owner turn it on, and it is almost always worth enabling. Just remember, it is not magic. A device stolen while unlocked, or one with a known backdoor, can still spill its contents. Encryption protects the resting device, not the one already open in a thief's hands. How do you protect calls and messages in transit? With communication encryption. Voice calls over Internet Protocol can be encrypted so that anyone tapping the line hears only scrambled noise. The same principle extends to video, text, and data through apps built on well-respected cryptography. When the channel is encrypted, interception becomes pointless because the contents are undecipherable. Think of speaking in a code only your intended listener can decode. Anyone else on the line just hears static. What do you do when a device is lost or stolen? You trigger a remote wipe to erase its data and settings from afar, over cellular or any internet connection. But treat it as a strong precaution, not a guarantee. A clever thief can block the wipe signal by pulling the SIM card, killing Wi-Fi, or dropping the device into a signal-blocking bag, then calmly extract the data. Worse, a plain wipe often just deletes, so recovery tools can undo it. The fix is to combine remote wipe with full device encryption, so anything recovered is unreadable ciphertext. Think of shredding documents before tossing them, rather than just dropping them whole in the bin. How do screen locks, lockout, and location services help or hurt? Screen locks stop a casual passerby, but only if you move past easy swipes and patterns to a personal identification number, password, or biometric, and set them to trigger after idle time. Device lockout adds teeth by disabling access after repeated failed attempts, sometimes with growing delays or even a full data wipe, so know the exact behavior before you ever guess a code. Location services cut both ways. Positioning can help you recover a stolen device and enable location-based access rules, but geotagging quietly stamps photos with where and when they were taken, which a stalker could exploit. Treat location as a tool that must be governed by policy, never left wide open. So let's bring it together. Mobile devices pair rich capability with weak defaults, so they demand deliberate protection. Android and iOS reflect open versus controlled philosophies. You govern the fleet with mobile device management or unified endpoint management, enforce real authentication with context, awareness, and encrypt the whole device. You protect communications in transit, keep remote wipe paired with encryption, and harden screen locks, lockout, and location settings. Get these controls in place, and a lost phone becomes a minor inconvenience instead of a crisis. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to Section 9.18, Part 2. This is the 91st session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. This part continues our tour of mobile security, moving into location, content, apps, and the ways users try to reshape their devices. In this session, we'll cover the management controls that keep mobile devices in line. How else can a device be located beyond GPS? How do you control the content on it? How do you govern which apps run? What risks hide in push notifications and outside app stores? How do storage segmentation, asset tracking, and removable storage change your exposure? Why does hardening matter? And what happens when users root, sideload, or reflash their devices? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because employees will always push the boundaries of their gadgets. Picture a field technician who sideloads a handy tool from a random website and quietly routes the phone to make it work. In one afternoon, your carefully configured device becomes an open door. Understanding these controls lets you set policy that guides that curiosity instead of being blindsided by it. So, how else can a device be located beyond GPS? Positioning goes far past satellites. Wi-Fi positioning uses the known spots of nearby access points to place a device indoors where satellites cannot reach. Cell tower triangulation locates a phone through the mast network, and Bluetooth beacons can track a device by its wireless address. Even a phone's motion and environmental sensors, or its camera and microphone, can help pin down where it is. Geofencing then puts this to work, drawing a virtual boundary that automatically switches features on or off, like disabling a camera the moment a device enters a secure site. Think of it as an invisible fence that knows exactly when the dog crosses the line. How do you control the content on a device? Through content management. A mobile content management system governs how company data is accessed and stored on devices, and it can tailor what it sends based on a device's screen, memory, and bandwidth. Its aim is to maximize usefulness while cutting confusion and risk, and it often ties into your broader device management. A content filter, by contrast, blocks resources by address, domain, protocol, or keyword. But that usually lives in the network firewall rather than on the phone. Think of content management as a librarian handing each reader the right book in the right format, while the filter is the front door guard deciding what gets in at all. How do you govern which apps run? With application control. This limits what can be installed, can force required apps, and can lock down settings for compliance, usually enforced through your device management. The strongest posture is allow listing, sometimes called deny by default, where nothing runs unless it is on a pre-approved list, so even unknown malware is blocked. The looser, more common stance is deny listing, which permits everything except items you specifically ban, meaning fresh threats sail through until you catch them. A focused variant, mobile application management, governs just the apps rather than the whole device. Think of allow listing as a strict guest list, where only invited names get through the door. What risks hide in push notifications and outside app stores? Both are quiet attack paths. Push notifications deliver messages straight to a device, which is handy, but attackers use them for social engineering and malicious links. And a push locker can trap a user in an endless loop of prompts until they close the browser entirely. Third-party app stores are riskier still because they screen apps far less carefully than the official stores. On many devices, flipping a single setting to allow unknown sources opens the floodgates, which is why managed devices usually block outside stores altogether. Think of the official store as a vetted marketplace and a third-party store as a back-alley stall, where the bargain may cost you dearly. How does storage segmentation, asset tracking, and removable storage change your exposure? Each shapes what can leak. Storage segmentation walls off company data and apps from personal ones, so the organization can wipe its side without touching an employee's photos. And you further reduce risk by storing as little sensitive data on the device as possible. Asset tracking keeps oversight of your inventory, verifying that a device is still with its assigned user and sometimes locating a missing one. Removable storage, like memory cards and USB drives, expands capacity but opens a channel for data to walk in or out. So you decide whether to allow it with controls or block it through device management. Think of segmentation as a locked drawer for work files, tracking as the checkout log, and removable media as a side door you must choose to guard or seal. Why does hardening a mobile device matter? Because every enabled feature is another way in. Turning on security controls is only half the job. You also strip away apps and features the device does not need, because the wider the surface, the more chances a flaw has to cause harm. This is the same hardening discipline you apply to servers, just aimed at a pocket-sized target. Think of a house with fewer doors and windows. There is simply less to break in through. What happens when users root, sideload, or reflash their devices? They tear down the guardrails. Rooting, called jailbreaking on Apple devices, breaks the built-in restrictions to gain full system control, which also means any malicious code now runs with those same total privileges. Sideloading installs apps by hand from outside the store, bypassing the very safeguards your management enforces. Custom firmware replaces the stock operating system entirely, and a botched attempt can leave a device bricked, as useless as a paperweight. Carrier unlocking is the tame exception here, since it only frees a phone to work on another network and adds little risk. For the rest, an organization should block modified devices from company resources. Think of rooting as ripping the seatbelts and airbags out of a car for a bit more speed. Why manage firmware updates over the air? Because updates are essential, but not automatic wins. Over-the-air firmware updates arrive by carrier or Wi-Fi, and owners should generally install them to stay patched. Yet, an update can change configuration or clash with your management controls. So for managed devices, you test first and may hold a device back until your management tools support the new version. In short, your standard patch, configuration, and change management discipline applies here too. Think of it like a software release for laptops. You do not push it to everyone until you have confirmed it will not break anything. So let's bring it together. Devices can be located many ways beyond GPS, and geofencing turns that into automatic control. Content management and content filtering govern data and access, while application control, allow listing, and app management decide what runs. Push notifications and third-party stores are quiet attack paths, and storage segmentation, asset tracking, and removable storage shape your exposure. Hardening shrinks the attack surface. User modifications like rooting and sideloading tear down protections, and firmware updates must be tested before rollout. Manage all of this deliberately, and mobility becomes a controlled asset rather than a loose end. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.18, part 3. This is the 92nd session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part closes out mobile security, focusing on credentials, deployment models, and the policy details that make them work. In this session, we'll cover the policy side of mobile devices. How do you handle the flood of credentials? What makes text messaging a weak spot? Which deployment models let devices onto your network? Who owns the data, the support, and the updates? How do you handle forensics, privacy, and legal exposure? What does mobility do to your network design? And which hardware and connection features deserve extra caution? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because the hard part of mobile security is rarely the technology. Picture a growing company that lets everyone use their own phones with no written rules. When a device is lost, no one knows who wipes it, who owns the data, or who pays for the replacement. A clear deployment policy answers those questions before the crisis, not during it. That policy is your real control. So how do you handle the flood of credentials on mobile devices? With credential management, people juggle countless logins. So a credential manager, also called a password vault, securely stores them all behind one master credential, ideally a multi-factor one. Some can even autofill logins for apps and sites. The vault itself is encrypted, and good ones stretch your master password into a strong key using proven key derivation methods so it resists cracking. Think of it as a single, heavily guarded keyring instead of a pocket full of loose keys you keep losing. What makes text messaging a weak spot? Because it is both useful and easily abused. Standard texting services, whether basic messages, multimedia, or the richer modern format, all double as attack vectors for phishing sent by text and messaging spam. Texting can also serve as a second authentication factor, but a code sent by text is the weakest option and should give way to any stronger second factor you have. Keep messaging apps updated and keep sensitive content out of them entirely. Think of a text message like a postcard. Convenient, but anyone along the way might read it or forge one. Which deployment models let devices onto your network? There are 4 common ones, and they trade cost against control. In bring your own device, employees use their personal phones, which is cheap and popular, but the least secure, since the organization has little control and mixes company and personal data. Choose your own device narrows that to an approved list, easing some risk but raising messy questions about who pays. Corporate-owned, personally enabled has the company buy devices that workers also use personally, giving you control while still commingling data. And the corporate-owned, business-only strategy keeps devices strictly for work, which is the most secure and cleanly separates work from personal life at the cost of carrying a second phone. Think of it as a spectrum from a free-for-all to a lockdown company car. Who owns the data, the support, and the updates on these devices? Your policy has to say so plainly. Data ownership gets thorny when personal and business data mix, especially when a lost device is wiped and takes an employee's photos with it, so define ownership and require backups up front. Support ownership settles who repairs or replaces a broken device, the company or the individual. And patch management spells out who installs updates, whether the organization tests them first, and which operating system versions are even allowed. Think of a company car again. You decide in advance who fuels it, who fixes it, and who is liable when something goes wrong. How do you handle forensics, privacy, and legal exposure? Deliberately, because these get emotional fast. For forensics, users must accept that a security incident may mean their device is examined or even seized, and company-owned devices can carry a master account to allow that access. Privacy runs the other way, since a personal device used for work loses much of its privacy, and workers may have to accept monitoring even off the clock. Legal exposure rises too, because personal devices in business use increase liability and the odds of a leak, and an acceptable use policy should spell out the boundaries. Think of it as a prenuptial agreement for the device. Everyone agrees to the terms while things are calm, so no one is shocked when they are not. What does mobility do to your network design? It can strain everything. If every worker brings a device, the number of endpoints on your network can double overnight, forcing you to plan for more addresses, more intrusion monitoring, and more bandwidth. Most of these devices are wireless, so your Wi-Fi has to handle real congestion and interference. In short, the convenience of mobility carries a hidden infrastructure bill. Think of adding a second rush hour to a road that was already busy. Without new lanes, everything slows to a crawl. Which hardware and connection features deserve extra caution? A handful of them punch above their weight. Onboard cameras and microphones can quietly capture confidential information, so policy should govern where they may be used. And geofencing can even disable a camera on company grounds. Tethering and hotspots let a device become an unauthorized bridge to the internet, sidestepping your filtering, so they should be blocked inside the facility. Contactless payments are convenient, but can be cloned unless they require a confirmation or an unlocked device. And SIM cloning lets an attacker hijack a victim's phone service, so physical control of the device and a service lock with the carrier both matter. Think of each of these as a small, unguarded gate in an otherwise solid wall. So let's bring it together. Credential managers tame the flood of logins, while text messaging stays a weak channel to keep sensitive data out of. The 4 deployment models trade cost against control, from bring your own device up to business only. Your policy must fix data ownership, support, and updates, and address forensics, privacy, and legal exposure before trouble hits. Mobility strains your network design, and cameras, microphones, tethering, payments, and SIM cloning each need targeted caution. Wrap all of it in clear policy, and mobile devices become a managed strength rather than a standing liability. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.19. This is the 93rd session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll cover the core mechanisms that keep a system trustworthy from the inside. Why should you never simply trust software? How does an operating system keep processes from stepping on each other? What does hardware add that software cannot? Where does a system's chain of trust actually begin? And how does a security policy shape a system from the very start? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because these mechanisms are the quiet foundation under everything else you build. Picture a payment platform that runs dozens of third-party plugins side by side. If one buggy or malicious plugin can reach into another's memory, the whole platform is compromised. The controls in this session are what stop that from happening. As an architect, you design them in, or you inherit the consequences. So why should you never simply trust software? Because any code written outside the operating system is, by default, unproven. This is not about assuming every program is evil. It is a protective stance. Since third-party software comes from someone other than the operating system maker, it might misbehave, so the system treats it as potentially harmful and isolates it. That is the principle of zero trust, applied right down at the machine level. And the time to build these protections is early, during design, not bolted on at the end. Think of a bank that assumes no visitor is pre-cleared and routes everyone through the same controls. When security is added only after the building is finished, it almost always fails. How does an operating system keep processes from stepping on each other? Through process isolation. The operating system gives each process its own separate memory space and then strictly enforces those boundaries, so one process cannot read or write another's data. This does two things at once. It blocks unauthorized access, and it protects the integrity of every process. Without it, one poorly written program could scribble into another's memory and crash the whole system, or a malicious one could reach in and attack its neighbors. Many systems deliver this by giving each process a virtual machine view, where it behaves as if it owns the entire computer. Think of soundproof studios along a hallway. Each performer works freely, unaware of and unable to disturb the others. What does hardware add that software cannot? Hardware segmentation serves the same goal as process isolation, keeping one process away from another's information, but it enforces the separation with physical hardware controls rather than software rules. That makes the boundary far harder to defeat, but it also makes it expensive and complex. So you tend to see it only where the stakes are extreme, such as national security systems, where the sensitivity of the data justifies the cost. Think of the difference between a locked office door and a separate reinforced vault building. Both keep people out, but one is a far stronger, far pricier barrier. Where does a system's chain of trust actually begin? At the root of trust. This is the anchor point from which every other security assurance flows, the foundation for verifying the integrity, authenticity, and confidentiality of what the system does. At its heart sits a trust anchor, a component that is inherently trusted and deliberately made tamper-resistant, because the trustworthiness of the whole system is derived from it. The strongest form is a hardware root of trust, built into dedicated chips, such as a trusted platform module or a hardware security module, which isolate cryptographic keys and operations from the general computing environment. Think of the master key kept in a sealed, tamper-evident case. Everything else in the building trusts a lock, precisely because that one key is protected. How does a security policy shape a system from the very start? A system security policy guides the design, development, testing, and maintenance of one specific system tightly targeted to that single effort. For developers, it takes the form of a document defining the rules and procedures for how the system manages, protects, and distributes sensitive information. A policy that specifically prevents information from flowing down from higher security levels to lower ones is called a multi-level security policy. The crucial point is timing. Security must be considered across the entire life of the project, applied to hardware, firmware, software, and how people use the system. Think of a blueprint that bakes in fire exits and load-bearing walls from the first sketch. Try to add them after construction, and the result is fragile. So let's bring it together. You start from the premise that software is untrusted, which is zero trust at the machine level, and you design protection in early. Process isolation gives each process its own guarded memory, while hardware segmentation enforces separation physically for the highest stakes systems. The root of trust anchors every assurance, strongest when built into dedicated hardware. And a system security policy shapes one specific system across its whole life, sometimes controlling flow between security levels. Master these, and you are building trustworthy systems from the foundation up. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session. Welcome to section 9.20. This is the 94th session of the CISSP Exam Prep series. In this session, we'll cover the common ways a security architecture gets undermined. How does data escape through a channel nobody is watching? What happens when design and coding flaws leave doors ajar? Which new flaws arrive with AI and machine learning? How does a rootkit hide in plain sight? And how do slow, tiny attacks slip past you? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because no architecture is ever perfectly secure, and attackers are relentlessly creative. Picture an accounting firm that trusts its systems completely and never watches for the quiet stuff. A rounding trick siphons pennies for months, and a hidden backdoor lets an insider stroll in at will. Knowing these flaw patterns is what lets you spot the subtle attack before it becomes a very public one. So how does data escape through a channel nobody is watching? Through a covert channel. A path used for communication that was never meant for it, so your normal controls do not guard it. It is the opposite of an overt channel, which is known, authorized, and monitored. There are two flavors. A covert timing channel leaks information by subtly altering the timing or performance of a component, like nudging a system's behavior in a pattern an observer can decode. A covert storage channel hides data by writing it somewhere another process can quietly read, such as unused disk space the operating system ignores. Both are hard to catch because they live outside your normal oversight. Your best defense is thorough auditing and hunting the logs for anomalies. Think of tapping a coded rhythm on a shared wall that the guards never think to listen to. What happens when design and coding flaws leave doors ajar? You inherit weaknesses that attackers love. Some come from deliberate shortcuts, like a maintenance hook or backdoor, a special entry point built into code during development to skip the usual security checks, which becomes a serious hole if it is not removed before release. Others come from plain mistakes, poor practices, or thin testing, and a program that mishandles an error can crash into an unstable state that an attacker exploits to gain higher privilege. That kind of failure can wreck the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your system. The remedy is security-conscious design from the start. Code review and testing tools run throughout development, since flaws caught early cost far less to fix. Think of a builder who leaves a hidden service hatch and never seals it. Convenient during construction, an open invitation afterward. Which new flaws arrive with AI and machine learning? A fresh class of weaknesses aimed at the models themselves. With large language models, prompt injection is the big one, where crafted input tricks the model into ignoring its real instructions, because the model often cannot tell developer commands from user data. Closely related is system prompt leakage, where the model spills its hidden instructions, handing an attacker the exact rules to bypass. Traditional machine learning has its own pair. Input manipulation, also called an evasion attack, feeds the model subtly altered input that makes it misclassify, while data poisoning corrupts the training data itself so the model learns the wrong lessons or hides a backdoor. The lesson is to treat every interaction with the model as potentially hostile and to secure both the training pipeline and the live environment. Think of slipping a forged instruction into a Clark stack of orders so they carry it out without question. How does a rootkit hide in plain sight? By burying itself deep in the operating system and lying to it. A rootkit can replace the kernel, slip beneath it, swap out device drivers, or infiltrate application libraries. So whatever it feeds, the operating system looks perfectly normal. That lets it hide its own files and processes from the very tools you would use to find them, making it an invisibility cloak for the attacker's toolkit. Often there are no obvious symptoms at all. One clue is a change in the size or hash of key system files, which file integrity monitoring can flag. And once you truly suspect a rootkit, the only trustworthy cure is to rebuild the machine from clean sources, because you can no longer believe anything it tells you. Think of a burglar who rewires the security cameras to loop empty footage while they work. How do slow, tiny attacks slip past you? By staying under the threshold that would raise an alarm. These are incremental attacks, and there are two classic forms. Data diddling is making small, quiet changes to data as it is entered or processed, rather than obviously wrecking a file. So it hides unless integrity checks or file integrity monitoring catch it, and it is usually an insider's game. The salami attack whittles away tiny slices of value, like shaving fractions of a cent off countless transactions until they add up to real money. You counter both with separation of duties, tight control over code, and monitors that watch for the small, repetitive transfers most people would overlook. Think of someone skimming a single grain of rice from every sack in the warehouse, unnoticed each time, a fortune over a year. So let's bring it together. No architecture is airtight, so you learn the flaw patterns. Covert channels leak data through timing or storage paths you are not watching. Design and coding flaws, from backdoors to sloppy error handling, leave openings you close with review and testing. AI and machine learning bring prompt injection, prompt leakage, evasion, and data poisoning, so you treat every model input as hostile. Rootkits hide deep and demand a full rebuild, and incremental attacks like data diddling and the salami attack stay small on purpose. Watch for the subtle, and you catch what the confident miss. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on RooCloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session.